My sister demanded my house, car, and family heirlooms for her wedding. I offered one gift, but then she said, when Rowan died in the spring of 2012, I thought I had already cried every tear my body could produce. But the weeks that followed proved I was wrong. He had fought cancer for nearly 3 years, stubbornly refusing to give in, and I had been at his side for every treatment, every late-night panic, every moment when the pain clawed at him so hard it left me shaking. The last night, he was lying in our bed with the sound of the ocean drifting in through the open windows, his hand in mine, whispering my name until his voice slipped into silence. I sat there long after his chest stilled, memorizing the lines of his face because I knew the moment I looked away, my life would never look the same again. We met in Savannah when I was 23 and still figuring out whether I wanted to stay in the city or run away to somewhere no one knew my name. He was 15 years older, already a successful architect with a reputation for turning impossible building projects into landmarks, and he had a calm self-assurance that drew me in before I realized what was happening. We married quickly, partly because we wanted each other and partly because neither of us saw any reason to wait. Over the years, we built a life filled with travel, long nights designing our dream home on the coast, and weekends at the lake cabin in North Carolina where we'd fish in the early mornings and drink wine on the dock at night. When the cancer came, it stripped away so much of that life, but it never touched the way he looked at me. I quit my job the month he started chemo because there was no one else I trusted to keep track of the endless medications, to help him on the days he couldn't stand, to keep him company through the long hours when the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the four. It was exhausting and isolating, but I would do it all again just to have one more morning with him. After the funeral, I learned just how much Rowan had prepared for the day he wouldn't be here to protect me. He left me our ocean view house, the one we'd spent 15 years renovating until every inch felt like ours. There was the loft downtown, a bright, open space with tall windows that we had been renting to a friend. He left me the lake cabin with its weathered wood and the wildflowers that grew in bunches along the shore each summer. In the garage, under the dust covers, were 2 classic cars he had loved, an emerald green Aston Martin from the 60s and a cherry red Ford convertible. Then there was the money, just under $2 million spread across several accounts, more than enough to live without worry if I chose to. Our son Nate, 21 now, was in Colorado, halfway through his degree in mechanical engineering. He had Rowan's sharp mind and dry humor, and even though he was an entire time zone away, we spoke at least twice a week. He always asked if I was eating well, like he was the parent and I was the child, and I'd tell him about my days working part-time in marketing for a small eco-friendly company. The job wasn't about the paycheck. It was about keeping my hands and my mind busy so I didn't spiral into the kind of grief that swallows you whole. I also threw myself into volunteering for the Cancer Foundation Rowan and I had supported for years. We'd always believed in putting time and money toward research and in helping families who were drowning under the weight of medical bills. Now it felt like more than charity work. It was a way to make sure his fight meant something beyond the 4 walls of our home. The house was too quiet most nights, but I filled it with small rituals. I'd water the garden we planted together, pulling weeds while the sun slid down into the water. On cooler evenings, I'd sit by the fireplace with one of Rowan's old architecture books, running my fingers over his notes in the margins. I wasn't looking for company beyond my friends, and I certainly wasn't thinking about dating. The idea of loving anyone the way I had loved him felt impossible. For a while, life was steady in its new, quieter rhythm. I visited Nate during long weekends, bringing him homemade meals because I refused to believe college food was good enough for him. I went to the cabin whenever I needed to breathe in the scent of pine and remember what it felt like to be somewhere untouched by hospitals and fear. And though I knew the grief would never really leave, I was learning how to live around it. I thought, in those early months, that I had made it through the worst of it. Rowan was gone, yes, but the love we had built and the life we had shared were still here in every room of the house, in every corner of my memory. I didn't know yet that a single phone call from my parents would shatter that fragile peace and drag me into a kind of fight I never imagined I'd have to face. One not with illness or fate, but with the people who were supposed to love me. It was late on a Thursday afternoon when the call came, the kind that starts with too much false cheer and ends with something you know you won't like. My parents were on speaker, their voices overlapping in that way that told me they'd rehearsed this together. My mother started with small talk about the weather in Savannah, about the flowers blooming in her yard, before she finally got to the point. Camille's getting married, she said, her tone bright, but carrying that familiar undercurrent that meant I was about to be volunteered for something. My father cut in before I could respond, explaining that they were hoping I could help her get started on the right foot. I knew exactly what that meant. Camille had always been the golden one, the one who charmed her way out of trouble, who got rescued from every bad decision by someone else's wallet or time. She was 35 now, 10 years younger than me, and still carried herself like the world owed her a parade. I asked them how exactly I was supposed to help, though I already suspected the answer. My mother said it plainly, financially. Camille and Reed were just starting out, and weddings were expensive these days. After we hung up, I called Camille right away, partly to get it over with and partly because I wanted to hear just how outrageous this was going to get. She picked up on the second ring, her voice spilling excitement into the line. She gushed about Reed, about how perfect he was, about how she'd been dreaming of this wedding her whole life. Then she launched into her plans without taking a breath. A massive ceremony at the most expensive golf club in the city, the one with the manicured lawns and the private marina. 250 guests, all seated for a plated dinner with imported wine and a custom dessert bar. A gown from a boutique in Charleston that cost more than most people's rent for a year. A 10-piece band she'd heard at someone's gala, who charged enough to make my eyes water. Imported orchids for every table, an ice sculpture, a fireworks display to close the night. I let her talk for almost 20 minutes, scribbling rough figures on the back of an envelope, my stomach sinking lower with each detail. When she finally stopped to ask what I thought, I told her it sounded beautiful, but had she considered how much all of this would actually cost? She laughed lightly, like I was missing the point, and said that was why she hoped I would cover it. She knew I could, because I had so much now. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully so the conversation didn't explode right there. I told her I was willing to give her a wedding gift, $40,000. That was more than generous, enough for a lovely celebration without the absurd extravagance. She went quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again her voice had lost some of its sparkle. "Only 40?" she asked, as though I had just offered her a gift card instead of a life-changing sum. I reminded her most couples pay for their own weddings, and this was a gift, not an obligation. She muttered something I couldn't quite make out, and then hurried off the phone. The next morning, I went to the bank and opened a separate account just for the wedding money. I deposited the $40,000 and added Camille as an authorized user so she could make her deposits and payments directly from there. I wanted things to be clear and contained. No shared access to my personal accounts. No misunderstandings about what was hers and what wasn't. That Sunday, I drove to my parents' house for dinner. Camille was there with Reed, a tall, quiet man who worked in IT and seemed unsure whether to speak or just smile politely. Over roast chicken and wine, I made sure to state it plainly so everyone heard the same thing. I told Camille that I'd set aside $40,000 for their wedding, that it was my gift to them both, and that anything beyond that would have to come from them or from Reed's family. My father nodded slowly, though his eyes told me he thought it should have been more. My mother's smile was polite but thin. Camille forced a thank you that sounded like it had been dragged out of her. Reed looked genuinely surprised, like maybe she hadn't told him the amount before now. For the next few weeks, there was nothing but silence from Camille. I went about my days, working my part-time job, attending the Cancer Foundation meetings, trading messages with Nate about his classes, and his roommate's strange habit of keeping a fish tank without fish. I let myself believe, briefly, that maybe the conversation had sunk in, that Camille would work within the generous budget and we could avoid the usual family storm. Then, one morning, while sipping my coffee and skimming emails, I saw her name in the inbox. The subject line was short and ominous, wedding gift list. I opened it expecting maybe a registry or some kind of suggestion for a shared family contribution. What I found instead made me choke on the coffee. She had listed 5 items, each more outrageous than the last. The downtown loft, the lake cabin in North Carolina, one of Rowan's classic cars, his antique watch, the one he wore nearly every day for 20 years and which I had always planned to give to Nate when he graduated, and a 3-week honeymoon in Bora Bora, which I knew from Rowan's meticulous travel planning would cost more than many people made in a year. I read the list twice, then a third time, convinced I must have misunderstood. But the words didn't change. She was asking for property, heirlooms, and a vacation fit for royalty, as though they were party favors I could just hand out. My hands were still around the coffee cup, but my knuckles had gone white. I could already imagine what would happen if I called her right then. Tears, accusations, and within an hour, my parents calling to tell me I was being cruel to their baby. So I sat there, thinking about all the years I had spent picking up after her messes, babysitting her when I was a teenager instead of being out with friends, sending money home during college when I could barely cover my own expenses, paying her tuition when she decided art history was her calling, and then covering her rent when she couldn't find a job, planning my own wedding without a cent of help from our parents because they said Rowan had money. By the time I set the cup down, my decision was made. I would give her one thing from the list, the cheapest option, and only because I was trying to be reasonable. The honeymoon, I told myself. I could cover that on top of the $40,000 already set aside, and then we'd be done. It still made my stomach twist, but it felt like a way to close the door on the conversation before it spun into a war. I typed out the email, short and direct, telling her I had already given her the wedding gift and would also cover the trip to Bora Bora. I hit send, feeling like I had just given away more than she deserved, but at least it would end here. Or so I thought. Her reply came faster than I expected, the kind of speed that meant she had been sitting at her phone waiting for me to give in. The subject line was gone, just the body of the message glaring at me from the screen. That's not how this works, Tessa. I need all of these things, not just one. You have so much, and I have nothing. Pick all 5 or don't bother. I read it again, slower this time, thinking maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something less absurd. But they stayed exactly the same, each one dripping with entitlement. She wasn't asking for help anymore. She was demanding half of what Rowan and I had built, like it was a debt I owed her just for being related. I called her before I could talk myself out of it. She answered with a sharp, "What?" That told me she already knew I wasn't going to play along. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're asking for hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of property and heirlooms, plus a vacation that would wipe out most people's savings." She didn't hesitate. "It's not insane," she said, her tone shifting into that defensive edge she always used when she thought she was about to win. "You have all that stuff just sitting there. The loft, the cabin, the cars, the watch. You said you're never getting married again. What do you even need them for?" I could feel my pulse in my ears. I told her I had a son, her nephew, and those things were meant for him. The loft when he graduated, one of the cars, the watch his father wore every day. She brushed it off like it was nothing. "But I'm getting married now," she whined, stretching the word married like it was some magic spell that should change my mind. "This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life, and I can't afford anything nice." I told her she could afford plenty with the $40,000 I'd already given her, and if she wanted more, she'd need to figure it out herself. There was a pause, and then her voice dropped into something cold and flat. "Fine, either you give me all 5 things on that list, or you're not welcome at my wedding." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I couldn't believe she was serious. "You're giving me an ultimatum?" I asked. She didn't even flinch. "I'm telling you how it is. You give me what I want, or you're not welcome." I reminded her, slowly, that I was already paying for her wedding. That was when she laughed, an ugly, dismissive laugh, and said the sentence that burned into my memory. "It's not even your money, Tessa. You didn't earn any of it. You just got lucky that your sick old husband died and left you everything. The least you can do is share some of it with your family instead of being a selfish bastard about it." My hands went cold. I didn't say a word, just ended the call and sat there, the quiet in the house suddenly louder than it had been in months. Rowan had fought with everything he had, and hearing her reduce his life and our marriage to some kind of windfall made my stomach turn. I opened my banking app and removed her name from the wedding account. It took less than a minute. Another few taps, and every payment she'd made with that money was canceled. The venue, the caterer, the flowers, the photographer. I shut my phone off completely. I didn't want to hear her scream into my voicemail or listen to my parents try to turn this into something I had done wrong. That evening, I worked in the garden until it was too dark to see. Rowan and I had planted it together years ago, filling the beds with lavender and rosemary and climbing roses. Pulling weeds and feeling the dirt under my nails helped me think, and right then I needed to think without rage making every decision for me. When I finally turned my phone back on the next morning, the notifications were endless. 37 missed calls, 28 text messages. Most were from Camille, each one more frantic than the last. She started with demands to give her access back, then switched to threats, then accusations that I had ruined her life. My parents' messages were exactly what I expected, my mother ordering me to call her immediately, my father saying I was being unreasonable. I deleted them all without replying. By that evening, I thought maybe the storm had passed. I was wrong. I heard cars in the driveway just after 7, and when I looked out the window, I saw both my parents' sedan and Camille's silver coupe. They didn't knock. Camille still had a key from years ago when she used to house sit, and she let herself in like she owned the place. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she shouted before she was even fully in the room. My parents came in behind her, my mother's expression pinched and furious, my father's jaw set. "You need to fix this right now," my mother said, using my full name like I was a child caught with my hand in a cookie jar. "Fix what?" I asked, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was pounding. "Give me back access to the account," Camille said, her face flushed. "My wedding is in 3 months, and you just ruined everything." I told her I hadn't ruined a thing, that she had done that herself the moment she decided to insult Rowan. She tried to backpedal, claiming she hadn't meant it like that, but then my mother spoke up. "Of course we know about the gift list," she said. I helped her make it. It felt like the air had been knocked out of me. "You helped her?" I asked, my voice low. My mother didn't hesitate. "You've been living comfortably for years," she said. "Rowan took good care of you. Now it's time for Camille to have her turn." My father nodded in agreement, adding that as her older sister, it was my responsibility to help her have a nice wedding and a good start in life. I looked at the three of them, standing in the living room Rowan and I had built together, demanding pieces of it like they were entitled to them. "Get out," I said, my voice sharper now. "I'm not giving her another penny. I'm not giving her back access. And I'm not coming to the wedding." Camille's eyes filled with tears, and then she spat. "You're just jealous because I'm getting married and you're going to be alone forever." That was it. "Either you leave now or I call the police." My father glared and told me I wouldn't dare. I picked up my phone and started dialing. They left. For a few days after they stormed out of my house, I let myself believe they might finally leave me alone. I avoided calls from numbers I didn't recognize and muted half my contacts so my phone wouldn't light up every 5 minutes. It was blissfully quiet, at least for a little while. Then the second wave hit. It started with my Aunt Renee, who I'd always been on decent terms with. She called pretending she wanted to check on me. But within 3 minutes, she was telling me Camille was under so much stress and I should try to meet her halfway. When I asked what halfway meant, Renee said it was selfish to let property sit unused when it could help my sister start her life. I told her I wasn't giving away my home, my cabin, or anything else Rowan had worked for, and she sighed like I was a lost cause. The next day, my cousin Logan called, followed by my Uncle Peter, then 2 more aunts, each of them hitting the same talking points as if they'd been handed a script. Camille had clearly recruited reinforcements, and they were lining up one by one to shame me into changing my mind. I stopped answering entirely after that, letting everything go to voicemail, but even the messages sounded coordinated. Variations on "family comes first, and you can't take it with you." Then Camille decided to drag Nate into it. One evening, just as I was getting ready to shut down my computer, my phone rang with his name on the screen. I smiled at first, expecting to hear about his classes or the girl he'd been nervously talking to. But the moment I answered, I heard the tension in his voice. "Mom, Grandma called me. She said if I don't convince you to help Aunt Camille with her wedding, she's going to disown me. She said I won't be welcome at family gatherings anymore, and she won't help pay for my college." I felt the kind of anger that doesn't burn hot, but goes cold, the kind that sharpens every word. "Nate," I said, "she's not paying for your college. I am. She has no right to threaten you, and she certainly has no right to drag you into this mess." He was quiet while I told him everything, about the list, about the demands, about the way she'd spoken about Rowan. When I finished, there was a long pause, and then he said, "If they're willing to cut me off because you won't give Aunt Camille a house and a car, maybe I don't want a relationship with them anyway." I can't remember the last time I felt so proud of my son. He was 21, sitting hundreds of miles away, and yet he saw the situation more clearly than people who had known me my whole life. I told him I loved him, and he said he thought his dad would be proud of me for standing up for myself. Those words carried me through the next few weeks. By late spring, the noise began to fade. Fewer calls, fewer messages. I guess Camille had either given up or found a new angle. I stayed busy with work and with the Cancer Foundation's upcoming gala, pouring my energy into something that actually mattered. Nate called every few days, and I could hear him sounding lighter too, like he'd stopped worrying about the family circus. Then, in early May, I made the mistake of opening Facebook. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but there it was, photos from Camille's wedding, posted by a cousin who clearly didn't think twice about tagging her. My curiosity got the better of me. The wedding wasn't at the golf club. It wasn't even in a rented hall. It was in my parents' backyard, under a small white tent that might have seated 30 people. Camille wore a simple gown, Nothing like the designer dress she'd raved about, and the flowers looked like they'd come from a supermarket. Instead of the 10-piece band, someone's cousin was strumming a guitar. It was modest, almost sweet in its simplicity, and if she had started with something like that, the $40,000 I'd offered would have covered everything with plenty left over. But she had chosen greed over gratitude, and this was the result. Reed looked happy enough in the pictures, and I found myself hoping he didn't know the full story of how the months before the wedding had gone. Summer came, and I made it my mission to enjoy it. I spent weekends at the lake cabin, letting the water lap against the dock while I read. I took a pottery class on a whim and discovered I was better at it than I expected. I even went on a spa trip with friends from work, something Rowan had always encouraged me to do, but I'd never made time for. Then, in August, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. It was Reed. "Hi, Tessa. I hope it's okay I'm reaching out. I got your number from Camille's phone. I feel like there are misunderstandings in the family we could work through." I stared at it for a while, then replied, "Reed, I appreciate you reaching out, but there aren't any misunderstandings. Camille knows exactly what she did. I hope you two are happy." He didn't reply. September rolled around, and with it, Nate's 21st birthday. I drove out to Colorado to celebrate with him. Over dinner, I slid a set of keys across the table, the keys to Rowan's Aston Martin. He stared at them like they couldn't possibly be real. "Mom, are you sure?" he asked. This was Dad's car. I told him it had been Rowan's wish, and that now was the right time. His eyes went glassy, and he said he missed him. I told him I did too, every day. On the drive home, I thought about the $40,000 that had sat in that wedding account, the money Camille had thrown back in my face. I knew exactly what to do with it. The next week, I wrote a check to the Cancer Foundation for the full amount, earmarked for a new caregiver support program. The director called me personally to say thank you, and for the first time in months, I felt like something good had come out of this mess. It's been 6 months since the wedding, and I haven't heard from any of them. No calls, no birthday cards, no holiday greetings. I'm fine with that. I have Nate. I have friends who value me for who I am, and I have the life Rowan and I built together. It was late on a rainy Thursday in November when the knock came. I wasn't expecting anyone, and most people I knew had the decency to text before showing up. I opened the door to find Reed standing there, his hair damp and his expression almost apologetic. He looked thinner than I remembered, like life had been grinding him down. For a second, I wondered if Camille was in the car behind him, but there was no one else in sight. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Camille's gone," he said, his voice flat, but not surprised. "She left 2 weeks ago, took most of the jewelry I bought her, drained my savings account, and left with some guy she'd been talking to before we even got married." I stood there, not knowing whether to feel pity or relief. I asked him why he was telling me this, and he reached into his coat pocket. "She tried to pawn this," he said, holding out a small velvet box. "I thought it should be with you." I knew the weight of it before I even opened the lid. Rowan's watch. The one Camille had demanded on that ridiculous list, the one I'd always intended for Nate. I took it from Reed slowly, feeling the cool metal in my palm. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. He gave a small shrug, like returning it was the only thing he could do right in the wreckage she'd left behind. "I'm sorry for what happened," he added. "I know we don't know each other well, but I think you were right about her." I told him I hoped he could rebuild, that whatever mess she'd made, it didn't have to define the rest of his life. He nodded, pulled his hood up, and walked back into the rain without looking back. When the door closed, I stood there for a moment, holding the watch in both hands. It was heavier than I remembered, or maybe it was just the weight of everything it had been through to come back to me. I carried it to my bedroom, set it on the dresser, and then something caught my eye. The lining inside the watch box wasn't sitting quite right. It looked like it had been lifted and pressed back down unevenly. I pulled at one corner, and a small folded piece of paper slipped into my hand. The edges were yellowed, the folds worn. I recognized Rowan's handwriting instantly, the neat, deliberate script he used whenever he wanted to make sure there was no room for misunderstanding. "If they ever try to take what's yours, remember, it's yours because you fought for it." I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at those words. I didn't know when he'd written them or what exactly he'd been thinking, but the timing felt almost eerie. Maybe he'd known, in some quiet way, that there would come a time when I'd have to defend what we'd built together. Maybe he just wanted to remind me that it wasn't selfish to protect the life we'd created. I put the note back in the box, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. Nate would have it one day, along with the watch, and maybe he'd understand then why I'd refused to hand over pieces of our life to someone who saw them only as things to be taken. In the weeks after Reed's visit, I heard bits and pieces about Camille through the same family grapevine that had once been used to pressure me. She was living in Miami now, or maybe Austin, depending on who was telling the story. She was supposedly working for a luxury event planner, which I suspected meant she was posting filtered photos on social media and calling it a career. No one mentioned Reed, and I didn't ask. Christmas came and went without a single card or call from my parents. I expected that. What I didn't expect was the quiet feeling of relief that came with it. For the first time in years, the holidays were simple, just me, Nate, and a handful of friends who didn't see me as a walking wallet. We cooked too much food, played board games until midnight, and laughed until our sides hurt. One evening in January, as I was locking up the house for the night, I caught sight of the garden through the kitchen window. Even in winter, it held a kind of stubborn life, bare branches, but roots holding steady beneath the soil. It made me think of how things had shifted over the past year. I'd lost people I thought were permanent, but I'd kept what mattered. My home, my son, my peace. Sometimes people ask if I miss my family. The truth is, I miss the idea of them, the version I thought I had before all of this. The reality was different, and I'm better off knowing it. I don't waste energy wondering if Camille regrets what she did. People like her rarely do. What I do think about, every now and then, is how close I came to giving in. How easy it would have been to hand over pieces of Rowan's legacy just to keep the peace. But peace built on surrender isn't real. It's just quiet before the next demand. Rowan's note is still in the watch box. Sometimes I take it out, not because I need convincing anymore, but because it reminds me of something I learned the hard way. Love is worth fighting for, and so is the life you build out of it. And if you let someone take that from you, they'll never stop taking. The rain had stopped by the time I finished locking up that night. The air was cool, the kind that carried the scent of salt from the ocean. I stood there for a moment on the porch, listening to the quiet. No voices raised in anger, no phone buzzing with demands. Just the sound of my own breathing and the steady beat of the life I'd fought to keep. I turned back inside, the watch safe in its box, the note exactly where it belonged. Whatever storms might come next, I knew one thing for certain: I'd be ready.